Welcome back to another deep dive into Fallout lore, where we uncover the darkest secrets the Wasteland tried to bury. Today's story is about the Brotherhood of Steel, but not the version they want you to know. This is the true founding, the blood-soaked origin that created the Wasteland's mightiest faction. The lore begins now. I need to tell you something before I lose my nerve, before the radiation sickness takes what's left of my mind, before the memories blur into the same nuclear haze that swallowed the world. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I saw, what I did, what we all did in October of 2077 at a place called Mariposa Military Base. You know the Brotherhood of Steel. Everyone in the Wasteland knows them. Shining knights in power armor, hoarding technology, keeping order. They tell stories about their founder, Captain Roger Maxson, a hero, a visionary, a man who saw the darkness in the old world and chose to build something better from its ashes. They're not entirely wrong, but they're not entirely right either, because I was there. I stood in that concrete tomb 200 feet underground. I heard the screams. I watched good men become executioners. I helped bury the bodies we created, and I know the truth that the Brotherhood built their entire ideology on murder. Let me start at the beginning. January 7th, 2077. That's when they moved us from West Tech to Mariposa, a brand new military installation in the California desert. Cutting edge, top secret. They told us we'd be guarding important research, national security, the kind of work that wins wars. Colonel Robert Spindle commanded the security detachment. Captain Roger Maxson was second in command. I was just another soldier in power armor, following orders, protecting scientists who wouldn't even tell us their names. The base had 4 levels. We weren't allowed past the 3rd. The scientists worked on level 4 with their own security team. Separate from us, separate from everything. That should have been our first warning. When people hide their work from the men protecting them, it's never for good reasons. We spent months at Mariposa in ignorance, training, drills, patrol rotations. The scientists came and went through sealed elevators. They never spoke to us, never looked us in the eye. They moved through the base like ghosts, clutching their clipboards and data pads, always in a hurry to get back below. But soldiers talk. Soldiers notice things. Little things that don't add up, like why the base had a military prison on level 3 that we couldn't access, like why supply shipments included medical restraints and sedatives, like why sometimes, late at night, you could hear sounds coming up through the ventilation shafts, sounds that didn't quite sound human. Then came October 10th, the day everything changed. The day we learned what forced evolutionary virus really meant. The day we discovered our government was using military prisoners as test subjects for biological weapons. One of our men found a way into the restricted areas. I won't say how. It doesn't matter now. What matters is what he saw, what he told us. Human beings strapped to tables, human beings lowered into vats of luminous green liquid, human beings screaming as their bodies twisted and grew and changed into something that wasn't human anymore. The scientists called them volunteers. Volunteers, as if anyone would volunteer to be dissolved in a chemical bath that rewrote their DNA, as if anyone would choose to become the monsters we'd seen in those vats. They were prisoners, American soldiers convicted of desertion, of cowardice, of crimes against the military code, men who'd made mistakes, yes, but men who deserved court-martial and prison, not torture, not transformation into biological weapons, not whatever those things in the vats had become. Morale collapsed overnight. Colonel Spindle locked himself in his office, wouldn't come out, wouldn't answer when we knocked. We could hear him in there, pacing, muttering to himself. The man was having a complete mental breakdown, and there was nothing we could do. That left Captain Maxson, 31 years old, service number 072389, a career soldier who'd fought in the resource wars, a man who believed in the chain of command, a man who thought the uniform meant something. The soldiers were screaming for blood. I was one of them. We wanted those scientists dead. Every single one of them. They'd turned our countrymen into monsters and called it research. They'd performed inhuman experiments in the name of national defense, and they expected us to keep protecting them. October 12th. Maxson had to physically restrain one of our squad from executing a scientist in the hallway. That's when he made the decision. He ordered interrogations, not executions. Interrogations. He wanted answers before we acted. He wanted to do things the right way, even as the world was falling apart around us. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. The next day, October 13th, Maxson brought in the first scientist, Dr. Robert Anderson, chief researcher of the Forced Evolutionary Virus Project, a man with 3 degrees and a government security clearance, and absolutely no conscience. I wasn't in the room, but I heard the conversation through the door. We all heard it. Anderson explaining the experiments, the dipping process, how they'd learned to control the mutation, how the government had ordered all of it, sanctioned all of it, how he was just following orders. The same excuse war criminals have used since war criminals existed, and Maxson wasn't buying it. He told Anderson that no government, no authority, no chain of command could justify what they'd done, that there were lines civilized people didn't cross, that turning human beings into weapons violated every oath they'd ever taken. Anderson started screaming, started saying he was a military man too, that he had authorization from the Department of Defense, that Maxson didn't understand how important this work was for national security, for winning the war with China, for protecting America. Then we heard the gunshot, single round, clean kill, Anderson dead on the floor before his body understood what happened. Maxson walked out of that room, a different man. You could see it in his eyes. He'd crossed a line, killed a defenseless prisoner, become exactly what he'd accused Anderson of being. A man who broke the rules because he believed the ends justified the means, but it made him our leader. In that moment, every soldier at Mariposa turned to Roger Maxson, not to the colonel locked in his office, not to the chain of command, to the man who'd done what we all wanted to do. The interrogations continued. Every scientist at Mariposa brought before Maxson one by one, every interrogation ending the same way, execution. Maxson pulled the trigger himself every time, took that burden on his own shoulders, made sure his men knew he wasn't asking them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. If you discovered your government was conducting experiments like this, would you follow orders or rebel? What would you do? October 15th, 2 days after Anderson died, we finally broke down the colonel's door. Spindle was sitting at his desk with his service pistol in his hand. Maxson tried to talk to him, tried to explain what we'd learned, tried to get him to take command again, but the colonel was gone, completely detached from reality. He looked at Maxson and said he was sorry, said he should have known, should have stopped it. Then he put the gun under his chin and apologized one more time. The sound of that gunshot still echoes in my dreams. The sight of his blood on the wall, the way Maxson just stood there, staring, processing the fact that he was now truly in command of a mutiny with no way back. By October 18th, every scientist at Mariposa was dead. Every single one. Maxson had interrogated them all. Erin Shellman held out the longest. She gave Maxson detailed documentation, project files, authorization codes, proof that the forced evolutionary virus experiments were ordered by the highest levels of government, proof that our own leaders had decided American lives were acceptable losses in the name of biological warfare. It didn't save her. Maxson executed her too, because knowing it was legal didn't make it right, because authorization from monsters doesn't justify monstrous acts, because at some point, good soldiers have to decide between following orders and following their conscience. October 20th, Maxson sat down at the communications terminal. He drafted a message, read it out loud to all of us, declared that he and every soldier under his command were in full desertion from the United States military. Full secession from the Union. We were no longer American soldiers. We were outlaws, traitors, men who'd executed government employees and abandoned our posts in wartime. He broadcast that message over every military frequency, waited for a response, waited for courts' martial orders, waited for threats, waited for anything. Nothing came back. Radio silence, complete and total silence from the chain of command. At the time, we thought it was because they knew we were right, because they couldn't justify what had happened at Mariposa, because they were ashamed. We didn't know the truth, didn't know that 3 days later, on October 23rd, the world would end, that China and America would launch their nuclear arsenals, that in 2 hours, 2 centuries of civilization would burn, that our rebellion would become meaningless in the face of global annihilation. The bombs fell on October 23rd, 2077. 2 hours after the first missile launched, the Great War was over. Most of humanity was dead. The rest wished they were. We were in the middle of interrogating the last scientist, Leon von Felden, head researcher, the man who designed the dipping process. Maxson had him against the wall, demanding to know how many other facilities were running experiments like this, how many other Mariposas existed across America. Then, the lights flickered. Emergency protocols activated. The communications array went dead mid-transmission. Every external sensor simultaneously registered massive electromagnetic pulses. Nuclear detonations, hundreds of them, thousands of them, the entire world lighting up on our radar screens like a 4th of July celebration. We lost contact with Westtech immediately, the research facility where the forced evolutionary virus originated. Just gone, wiped off the map. Maxson's gut feeling had been right. They'd hit the source first. For several minutes, nobody moved. We just stood there in that interrogation room, staring at von Felden, processing the fact that everything we knew was gone. Our country, our families outside the base, our entire civilization reduced to radioactive ash while we argued about ethics. Von Felden started laughing, not happy laughter, the broken, hysterical kind. He told us we'd killed him and his team for nothing, that the forced evolutionary virus was supposed to save humanity from exactly this scenario, that we'd destroyed the only research that could have protected survivors from radiation, that our moral stand had just condemned the Wasteland to 200 years of mutation and suffering. Maxson shot him mid-laugh. Last execution. Last scientist. Last man who knew how the FEV project really worked. Then he turned to us, told us to bring our families inside. Every wife, every child, every relative we'd smuggled into the facility. Get them underground. Get them protected. Because China wasn't done yet. Because Mariposa had survived the first strike, and they'd correct that mistake soon. October 24th. We moved everyone into the secure levels, counted heads, took inventory. We had about 100 soldiers in power armor, maybe twice that in civilians, enough supplies for 6 months if we rationed, enough ammunition to fight off a small army, and absolutely nowhere to go. The forced evolutionary virus had been accidentally released during the bombardment. The vats had ruptured. Green luminous death seeping into the foundation, seeping into the water table, seeping into the new world we'd just inherited. Von Felden's final revenge, the thing he'd created, would outlive us all. October 25th. Sergeant Plattner volunteered to do an external survey, suited up in power armor, checked every seal twice, walked out into the wasteland to take atmospheric readings. He came back 4 hours later, reported no significant radiation in our immediate area. Wind patterns had carried most of the fallout east. We'd gotten lucky, impossibly, undeservedly lucky. But luck doesn't last. Maxson knew it. We all knew it. China would realize they'd missed Mariposa eventually. They'd send another strike, or the forced evolutionary virus would spread through the base and turn us all into the monsters we'd tried to stop. Either way, staying meant death. October 26th, Maxson ordered us to bury the scientists, all of them, every body we'd created. We carried them outside and dug graves in the irradiated sand. No markers, no ceremony. Just holes in the ground for the men we'd executed in the name of justice. I helped bury Anderson. His face was still frozen in that expression of outrage, like he couldn't believe we'd actually done it, like he genuinely thought his government authorization would protect him from consequences. Maxson stood over the graves when we finished. He didn't say a prayer, didn't offer any words of comfort or justification. He just stared at what we'd done and said something I'll never forget. "I killed a man today," he said. "I've killed before, in battle, in war, but Anderson was defenseless, unarmed, a prisoner, and I executed him because I decided I was judge, jury, and executioner. We all did. We became exactly what we hated. The only difference is we believe our cause was righteous. Can murder ever be justified if the cause is righteous? Where do you draw the line between justice and vengeance?" Nobody responded. What could we say? He was right. We'd committed war crimes. The fact that our victims were also war criminals didn't change what we'd done. Blood doesn't wash away blood. October 27th, the Exodus began. That's what Brotherhood historians call it now. The Exodus. Like it was some noble journey, some grand migration. They make it sound heroic. It was terror, pure survival terror. 100 soldiers in power armor and 200 terrified civilians walking into a nuclear wasteland because staying meant certain death. Maxson led us south, toward Lost Hills, Adiamat, government bunker he'd found in the facility records, pre-war emergency shelter, radiation shielded, supplied for long-term habitation, our only chance at survival. The journey should have taken 2 days. It took weeks. Because the wasteland wasn't empty, it was full of other survivors, and most of them had gone completely insane. Raiders hit us on the second day, desperate people with guns and radiation sickness and nothing to lose. They saw our civilians and decided we'd make good targets. Easy pickings. They learned different when our power armor units returned fire. But power armor doesn't cover everything. And the raiders figured out fast that we couldn't protect everyone at once. They started firing from distance, picking off civilians at the edge of our formation, taking shots and running before we could retaliate. We lost people every day, families cut down by sniper fire, children dying of radiation poisoning we couldn't treat, elderly who couldn't keep up with the pace and got left behind because stopping meant death for everyone. Maxson's wife died in the 3rd week. Elizabeth Maxson. I didn't know her well. She'd always been kind to the soldiers, brought us coffee during night shifts, asked about our families, treated us like human beings instead of guard dogs. A raider shot her through the throat from 400 yards. She bled out in Maxson's arms before we could even locate the shooter. Their teenage son watched it happen, couldn't look away, couldn't process it, just stood there staring while his father held his mother's corpse. We buried her in a shallow grave and kept moving. Had to. Stopping meant dying. Grieving meant dying. The only thing that mattered was reaching Lost Hills. Everything else was secondary. In survival situations, is it moral to leave people behind to save the majority? How do you decide who lives and who dies? Some of our soldiers couldn't handle it, couldn't deal with watching civilians die while they stood protected in power armor. A group split off during the 4th week. Sergeant Dennis Allen led them, said he was taking his squad southwest, said he'd find another shelter, another way to survive, said Maxson's leadership had gotten too many people killed. Maxson let them go, gave them supplies and weapons schematics, told them he hoped they'd make it, told them the Brotherhood would always consider them family. We never saw them again. The Brotherhood sent knights to find them years later, found ruins, found bodies, found evidence of a massacre. Nobody knows what happened to Allen's group. Nobody wants to know. November 2077. We reached Lost Hills, a concrete bunker buried in the California hills, radiation shielded, equipped with a communications satellite, stocked with supplies and technology and everything we needed to survive. We'd started with 300 people. We arrived with less than 200. The Exodus had cost us 1/3 of our numbers, 1/3 of our families, 1/3 of our souls. Maxson sealed the bunker behind us, posted guards, established a command structure, and then he disappeared into the communications room for 3 days straight. When he emerged, he'd made contact with other military units across the country. Lieutenant Elizabeth Taggarty in Appalachia, National Guard units near the original Mariposa site, scattered survivors with military training and pre-war discipline. People who remembered what civilization looked like and wanted to build it again. He gathered us in the assembly hall. Every soldier, every civilian, every survivor of the Exodus, and he told us what we were going to become. The United States failed, he said, failed to protect its citizens, failed to stop the experiments, failed to prevent the war. The old government is dead. The old military is dead. The old world is dead, and it's never coming back. But we're alive. We have technology. We have training. We have the knowledge to rebuild civilization, and we have a responsibility to make sure what happened at Mariposa never happens again. He paused, looked at each of us, made sure we understood what he was saying. We're going to form a new order, a brotherhood, not of nations or governments or armies, a brotherhood of steel. We'll preserve the technology of the old world. We'll protect it from misuse. We'll make sure no scientist ever again turns human beings into weapons. No government ever again authorizes genocide in the name of security. No soldier ever again has to choose between following orders and following their conscience. It sounded noble. It sounded righteous. It sounded like exactly what the Wasteland needed. But I was there when we buried those scientists. I was there when Maxson executed defenseless prisoners. I was there when we became the very thing we claimed to fight against. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. The Brotherhood of Steel was founded on murder, on the graves we dug, on the executions we justified, on the belief that our violence was righteous because our cause was pure. And maybe it was. Maybe those scientists deserved what they got. Maybe killing them prevented worse atrocities. Maybe our rebellion saved lives in the long run. Or maybe we were just soldiers who couldn't handle what we'd seen, who needed to punish someone for the horrors we'd witnessed, who convinced ourselves that execution was justice because the alternative was admitting we'd become killers for nothing. I don't know anymore. 5 years at Lost Hills. 5 years watching Maxson build his brotherhood. 5 years watching our murders transform into mythology, into the founding legend of the Wasteland's mightiest faction. They don't tell recruits about Anderson, about Spindle, about the fact that every principle the Brotherhood stands for was born in an interrogation room where defenseless prisoners were executed one by one. They don't tell them that our founder was a war criminal who declared himself judge and executioner, that our sacred mission to prevent technological misuse started with us murdering the only people who understood that technology. They don't tell them the truth, because the truth doesn't sound heroic. The truth sounds like what it is: justified murder, righteous killing, the kind of moral compromise that lets good people do terrible things and sleep at night. The next 5 years changed everything, changed us, changed what the Brotherhood meant, changed how we told ourselves the story of Mariposa. Maxson spent those years building infrastructure, ranks, protocols, a whole mythology around what we'd done. He drew inspiration from medieval knights, from the scribes who'd preserved knowledge after Rome fell, from the idea that disciplined warriors could protect civilization from itself. He created the rank of paladin for our best soldiers, knights for our standard troops, scribes for the technical specialists, elders for the leadership council, every rank carefully chosen to distance us from the military structure that had failed at Mariposa, to make sure no surviving general could claim authority over us, to ensure we'd never again be tools of a corrupt government. It was brilliant. Psychological warfare against our own past. By changing our titles, our structure, our entire identity, Maxson made sure we could never go back to being United States Army soldiers. We were something new, something separate, something that existed outside the chain of command that had authorized those experiments. But, underneath the new names and noble mission, we were still the same men who'd executed prisoners at Mariposa, the same soldiers who'd justified murder because we believed we were right, the same people who'd killed defenseless scientists and called it justice. The Wasteland didn't care about our moral complexity. Survivors needed help, needed protection, needed someone to stand between them and the horrors the war had created. And we did help. At first, Maxson's original vision was expansive: work with outsiders, protect civilians, share technology carefully to help rebuild. The Brotherhood wasn't supposed to be isolated. We were supposed to be the catalyst for humanity's rebirth. I believed in it. We all did. After the Exodus, after watching so many civilians die, we wanted to protect people, wanted to make sure their deaths meant something, wanted to build something better from the ashes of Mariposa. We sent out patrols, helped settlements defend against raiders, traded our manufactured weapons for supplies we couldn't produce, shared medical technology, taught basic engineering, acted like actual protectors instead of hoarding knights. But technology is power, and power changes people, changes organizations, changes missions. It started small. The settlement would ask for help with their water purification. We'd fix it. Then they'd ask for defensive weapons. We'd provide them. Then they'd ask for more advanced systems, power armor, energy weapons, the kind of technology that could shift the entire balance of power in the Wasteland. And we'd say no, because that's where Maxson drew the line. Basic technology, yes. Survival technology, yes. But advanced military hardware? That stayed with the Brotherhood, because we'd seen what happened when governments had unlimited access to destructive technology. We'd witnessed the result at Mariposa. The settlements didn't understand. They saw us as hoarders, as elitists who kept the good technology for ourselves while forcing them to make do with scraps. They didn't know what we'd seen, didn't know what horrors advanced technology could create in the wrong hands. Should advanced technology be controlled by a select group for everyone's safety? Or does everyone have the right to access knowledge regardless of the risks? Some of our own people agreed with the outsiders, thought we should be more open, more generous, more willing to share the knowledge we'd preserved. They argued with Maxson, said he was becoming exactly what he'd rebelled against, a leader who decided what others could and couldn't know, who made choices for people without their consent. Maxson listened to them, genuinely considered their arguments, but in the end, he always came back to the same point. The government had decided the forced evolutionary virus was acceptable. Scientists had decided human experimentation was justified. Military leaders had decided atrocity was necessary for national security. Every single one of them had access to advanced knowledge. Every single one of them had convinced themselves their choices were righteous. Every single one of them had created horrors that would haunt the Wasteland for centuries. So no, the Brotherhood would not share advanced technology freely, would not trust outsiders to make responsible decisions, would not risk another Mariposa happening because we were too idealistic to see the danger. It made sense. It was logical. It was exactly the kind of protective thinking that leads organizations down dark paths. By 2082, 5 years after the Exodus, Maxson formally established the Brotherhood of Steel, no longer provisional, no longer temporary, a permanent organization dedicated to preserving technology and preventing its misuse. He gave speeches about our mission, our duty, our sacred responsibility to protect humanity from itself. Beautiful speeches, inspiring speeches, the kind that made you forget you were listening to a war criminal justify his war crimes. Because that's what we were. War criminals who'd executed prisoners and deserted our posts and stolen military equipment. The fact that our victims were also criminals didn't change what we'd done. The fact that we'd built something noble from that violence didn't erase the violence itself. I watched Maxson age during those 5 years. The man who'd led the Exodus was 31. The man who founded the Brotherhood was 36. Only 5 years, but he looked 20 years older. Gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, the weight of every decision pressing down on him. He never talked about Mariposa, never mentioned the scientists by name, never referenced the executions. It was like he'd sealed that entire chapter of his life in a vault and thrown away the key. But I saw him sometimes, late at night, sitting alone in the command center, staring at maps of the wasteland, and I knew he was thinking about it, about Anderson screaming that he was just following orders, about Spindle apologizing before pulling the trigger, about all those bodies we'd buried in the desert. The radiation sickness started affecting me around 2083. Not bad at first, just fatigue, headaches, the kind of symptoms you could ignore if you tried hard enough. But it got worse. Hair loss, nausea, memory problems, the long-term consequences of walking through a nuclear wasteland in power armor that wasn't quite radiation-proof enough, of breathing air contaminated with forced evolutionary virus particles, of surviving when maybe I shouldn't have. Maxson offered to help. Brotherhood medical technology was advanced. They could slow the progression, extend my life by years, maybe decades. I refused, told him I'd earned this death, that every scientist we'd executed had earned their deaths too, but we'd given them bullets instead of trials, that maybe radiation poisoning was the universe's way of balancing accounts. He didn't argue, just nodded, told me I'd always have a place in the Brotherhood, that my service at Mariposa and during the Exodus would never be forgotten. But that's the thing. It was already being forgotten, already being transformed into legend, already becoming the heroic story of soldiers who stood against tyranny instead of the complicated truth of men who committed murder because they believed they were right. New recruits joined the Brotherhood, people who hadn't been at Mariposa, who hadn't walked the Exodus, who only knew the official history, the sanitized version where Maxson was a hero and the scientists were villains and everything was clear-cut and morally simple. They looked at us veterans with reverence, asked us to tell stories about the founding, about the early days, about what it was like to serve under the great Roger Maxson. And we told them the stories they wanted to hear, about standing against injustice, about refusing to follow immoral orders, about building something noble from the ruins of the old world. We didn't tell them about the executions, about the murders, about the fact that our founder had personally killed at least a dozen defenseless prisoners before the Brotherhood even existed. Because how do you explain that to idealistic young recruits? How do you tell them the organization they've joined was founded by war criminals? That every principle they believe in emerged from interrogation rooms and mass graves? You don't. You let the legend grow. You let the truth fade. You let history become mythology because mythology is easier to believe in than complicated reality. Maxson died in 2135. Cancer, 58 years old. His body finally giving up after decades of radiation exposure and stress and carrying the weight of everything he'd done. I was still alive. Barely. The radiation sickness had progressed slowly, slower than it should have. Some genetic quirk that kept me breathing when I should have been dead. I attended his funeral, watched them lower his body into the ground with full honors, watched his son, Maxson II, take over as High Elder, watched the Brotherhood mourn their founder like he was a saint. And maybe he was. Maybe you can be both a saint and a sinner. Maybe you can commit atrocities and build something noble. Maybe the contradiction is what makes us human instead of monsters. Or maybe that's just another justification, another way of telling ourselves comfortable lies so we can sleep at night. Maxson II was different from his father, more rigid, more isolationist. He'd been a teenager during the Exodus, had watched his mother die, had grown up in Lost Hills surrounded by soldiers who'd executed scientists and called it justice. It shaped him, made him harder, more suspicious of outsiders, more committed to the idea that the Brotherhood should hoard technology instead of sharing it, more willing to let the wasteland suffer if it meant keeping advanced weapons out of irresponsible hands. The Brotherhood stopped recruiting outsiders under his leadership, stopped trading with settlements, stopped pretending they were protectors of humanity, and started acting like exactly what they'd become. an isolated military order hoarding pre-war technology and eliminating threats to their power. It wasn't what Roger Maxson wanted. His vision had been broader, more inclusive, more hopeful about humanity's potential to rebuild without repeating past mistakes. But his son had learned different lessons from Mariposa, had learned that people couldn't be trusted, that good intentions led to atrocities, that the only way to prevent another forced evolutionary virus project was to control all technology absolutely. The Brotherhood's ideology, radicalized under Maxson II, became more cult-like, more fanatical. The mission to prevent technological misuse transformed into an obsession with hoarding power and eliminating anyone who threatened Brotherhood supremacy. And it all traced back to those graves in the desert, to those interrogations at Mariposa, to the moment Roger Maxson decided he was judge, jury, and executioner, to the precedent we set when we murdered prisoners and called it righteousness. I'm dying, now, really dying. Not the slow radiation death I've been living with for decades, something faster, more final. The doctors tell me I have weeks at most. The cells in my body are finally giving up after a century of fighting against nuclear contamination. A century. I've lived 106 years in this wasteland, watched the Brotherhood grow from 100 soldiers in a bunker to the most powerful military force in what used to be California. Watched Roger Maxson's dream transform into something he wouldn't recognize. Watched history become legend, become lie. And I need to tell the truth before I die, before the last person who was actually there at Mariposa takes the real story to their grave, before the Brotherhood's mythology becomes the only version that exists. So let me tell you what really happened in those final days, the parts the official history leaves out, the uncomfortable truths that don't fit the heroic narrative. After we buried the scientists on October 26th, Maxson ordered us to raid the base for supplies, weapons, schematics, technical documentation, anything that might be useful in the wasteland. We had one day before the exodus, one day to strip Mariposa of everything valuable. We went to level 4, the restricted area, the place we'd been forbidden to enter for 9 months, and we found things that made the forced evolutionary virus experiments look merciful. Research logs detailing other projects, other facilities, other experiments the government had sanctioned. Brain extraction programs for robots, chemical weapons testing on prisoners, biological warfare research that made FEV look like a school science project. Mariposa wasn't an isolated incident, it was standard procedure. The United States government had been conducting illegal experiments for decades, using prisoners as test subjects, justifying atrocities in the name of national security, building weapons that violated every international treaty ever written, and we'd only stopped one facility, one small piece of a massive, systemic program of government-sanctioned horror. Maxson read those files, every single page, stood in that laboratory, surrounded by the evidence of his government's crimes, and understood something terrible, understanding that executing the scientists at Mariposa hadn't solved anything, hadn't prevented anything, hadn't changed the fundamental reality that powerful organizations will always justify monstrous acts if they believe the cause is righteous, including the Brotherhood of Steel, including us, because we'd done exactly what those scientists did. We'd decided we knew better. We'd appointed ourselves as arbiters of justice. We'd killed people who couldn't defend themselves and told ourselves it was necessary. Moral. Right. The only difference was we believed our cause was noble, but the scientists believed their cause was noble too. They thought they were protecting America, winning the war, saving lives by creating biological weapons that would end the conflict with China quickly. We thought we were stopping atrocities, preventing future horrors, saving humanity from technological abuse. Both groups convinced themselves that murder was justified. Both groups had good intentions and absolute certainty in their righteousness. Both groups were wrong. That's what Maxson understood in that laboratory. That's why he spent the next 5 years building elaborate structures and ranks and protocols. not to distance us from the military, to distance us from ourselves, to create enough bureaucracy and mythology that we could forget we were just soldiers who'd committed war crimes and gotten away with it. The Brotherhood's entire ideology is built on that contradiction. We hoard technology to prevent its misuse, but we murdered the people who understood that technology. We protect humanity from dangerous knowledge, but we decided which knowledge was dangerous based on our own judgment. We prevent atrocities, but we committed atrocities to establish that mission. It's circular logic, self-justifying reasoning, the same mental gymnastics every oppressive organization uses to convince itself it's actually the hero. And it worked. The Brotherhood survived, grew, became powerful, became respected, became exactly what the Wasteland needed in many ways. An organization with discipline and technology and the strength to protect settlements from raiders and mutants and the chaos of post-nuclear America. But that success doesn't erase what we did, doesn't justify the executions, doesn't change the fact that our righteousness was built on graves we dug ourselves. I've spent a century thinking about this, a century wondering if we were right, if killing those scientists prevented worse horrors, if our rebellion saved lives in the long run, and I still don't know. Maybe we were heroes, maybe we were murderers, maybe we were both. Maybe that's what every soldier becomes when they're forced to choose between following evil orders and committing evil acts to stop them. The Brotherhood tells a different story now. In their version, Maxson discovered the experiments and immediately knew they were wrong. Colonel Spindle's suicide proved the government's guilt. The scientists were executed after fair interrogation. The Exodus was a noble journey. The Brotherhood was founded on pure principles of technological preservation and human protection. It's not exactly a lie, but it's not exactly the truth either. It's the version of events that makes us look good, that transforms complicated moral choices into clear, heroic decisions, that erases the doubt and guilt and horror of what we actually did. Young paladins learn about the founding of the Brotherhood like it's ancient history, sacred mythology. They memorize Maxson's speeches. They revere the Exodus as a trial by fire that proved our worth. They believe the scientists at Mariposa got what they deserved. They don't learn that Maxson had nightmares for years afterward, that he'd wake up screaming Anderson's name, that he questioned every decision he made because he knew he'd become a killer, that the weight of those executions never left him. They don't learn that half the soldiers who survived the Exodus suffered from what we'd now call post-traumatic stress, that some of them couldn't function, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop seeing the faces of the people we'd killed, that the Brotherhood's early years were full of broken men trying to build something noble from the pieces of their shattered consciences. They don't learn the truth, because the truth is messy and complicated and doesn't inspire young recruits to dedicate their lives to the Brotherhood's mission. So they learn the legend instead, and the legend becomes history, and history becomes truth, and the actual truth gets buried deeper than those scientists in the desert. I'm telling you this because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand that the Brotherhood of Steel wasn't born from noble principles. It was born from murder, from soldiers who couldn't handle what they'd seen and killed the only people who could have explained it, from a man who decided he had the right to execute prisoners without trial. The Brotherhood does good work. I won't deny that. They've protected countless settlements, prevented raiders from massacring civilians, preserved technology that would have been lost forever, built a functioning military order in a world of chaos. But their righteousness is built on blood. Their moral authority comes from men who committed war crimes. Their mission to prevent technological abuse started with them murdering scientists and hoarding the very technology they claim to protect humanity from. That's the contradiction at the heart of the Brotherhood, the lie they tell themselves, the truth they've buried so deep that most of them don't even know it exists. And maybe that's necessary. Maybe you can't build a functioning organization in the Wasteland if you're constantly questioning your moral foundation. Maybe the legend is more useful than the truth. Maybe soldiers need to believe their cause is purely righteous to function effectively. But I was there. I stood in that interrogation room. I helped carry Anderson's body to his grave. I walked the exodus and watched civilians die and understood that our righteousness hadn't saved them. Our principles hadn't protected them. Our moral certainty hadn't prevented their deaths. All we'd done was kill people we thought deserved killing, just like every executioner in history, just like every soldier who's ever justified murder by claiming they were following a higher law. The difference is, we won. We survived. We built something that lasted, and winners get to write the history books. So the history books say we were heroes. Say Maxson was a visionary. Say the founding of the Brotherhood was a triumph of human nobility over government corruption. And maybe it was. Maybe you can build something good from something evil. Maybe the ends do justify the means sometimes. Maybe those scientists really did deserve execution without trial. Or maybe we were just scared soldiers who found people to blame for the horrors we'd witnessed. Maybe we killed them because it made us feel like we had control in a world spinning into chaos. Maybe we justified it afterward because accepting that we'd murdered defenseless prisoners was too painful to bear. I don't know. After a century of thinking about it, I still don't know. What I do know is this: the Brotherhood of Steel was founded on murder. That's not opinion, that's fact. Roger Maxson executed at least 12 scientists personally. His soldiers executed dozens more. We buried them in unmarked graves and walked away without trial, without justice, without anything except our own certainty that we were right. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. Everything the Brotherhood has built since then, every paladin, every scribe, every piece of preserved technology, every settlement protected, every life saved, all of it rests on that foundation of blood. Does that make the Brotherhood evil? I don't think so. Evil is simpler, more absolute. The Brotherhood is complicated, human, capable of both nobility and atrocity, sometimes simultaneously. Does it make Maxson a villain? No. He was a man faced with impossible choices who made the decisions he thought were right. He lived with the consequences. He built something meaningful from tragedy. He tried to prevent future Mariposas by any means necessary, but it doesn't make him a pure hero either. Heroes don't execute prisoners. Heroes don't commit war crimes. Heroes don't found organizations on mass graves and then spend years building mythology to hide what they've done. Maxson was human, flawed, capable of both terrible violence and genuine nobility, like all of us who survived Mariposa, like everyone who's ever had to choose between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truths. The Brotherhood will continue after I'm gone. They'll keep preserving technology, keep hoarding power, keep telling themselves they're protecting humanity from its own worst instincts. Keep believing the legend they've built around their founding. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the Wasteland needs organizations that believe in themselves absolutely. Maybe doubt is a luxury civilizations in collapse can't afford. Maybe the Brotherhood's arrogance is exactly what allows them to function effectively in a world of chaos. But you deserve to know the truth. You deserve to understand that the Brotherhood's righteousness isn't pure. Their moral authority isn't absolute. Their mission to prevent technological abuse was founded by men who abused their power to murder people they decided didn't deserve trials. That's the secret at the heart of the Brotherhood of Steel. The truth they've buried for over a century. The confession I'm leaving behind because someone needs to remember what really happened at Mariposa. We were soldiers who witnessed atrocities, who couldn't follow orders that violated our conscience, who rebelled and killed and justified it by believing our cause was righteous, who built an organization dedicated to preventing exactly the kind of absolutist thinking that led us to commit murder in the first place. The irony is almost beautiful, almost funny. If it weren't so tragic, my name still doesn't matter. I'm just the last witness, the last person alive who was actually there when it happened. The last voice that can tell you the Brotherhood of Steel wasn't born from nobility. It was born from blood, from murder, from soldiers who decided they were judge, jury, and executioner, from graves dug in radioactive sand, from the belief that righteous violence is somehow different from any other kind of violence. That's the truth. That's what the Brotherhood doesn't want you to know. That's what I'm confessing with my final breath. The Brotherhood of Steel was founded on murder, and everything they've built since, all their power, all their righteousness, all their claims to moral authority, rests on that foundation of blood. Remember that. When you see paladins in their shining armor, when you hear scribes talking about preserving humanity's future, when elders speak of their sacred mission to prevent technological abuse, remember that it all started with executions, with war crimes, with murder that was justified by good intentions and absolute certainty, and the belief that the ends justified the means. Remember Mariposa, remember the scientists we executed. Remember that righteousness built on graves is still built on graves, no matter how noble the cause. That's my confession, my final testimony, my warning from beyond death. The Brotherhood of Steel was founded on murder, and they've spent a century trying to forget it.